Good morning. Good morning. If there's a crime against your ears, there's nothing I can do about it.
Zero, baby. Just got to put up with it until 10 o'clock. Then you move on. Well, good to have you both here, and we
it's good
appreciate
to be back.
Your presence here. Good to have you back, man. Where were you last week?
I was in Boston for a conference.
Boston?
Yeah, for a prosecutor's conference, and they got some really good training, and got to check out a baseball game at Fenway Park. First time there.
Oh, what'd you think?
It was really good. It was the game where that Tristan Casas injured his knee.
Yeah.
And like at the beginning of the game, there was a couple home runs. The Red Sox won. The crowd was electric. They sang "Sweet Caroline," and I added the West Virginia version.
What's the West Virginia version?
I can't say it on the radio.
Yeah. So what happens at a prosecutor's conference? Is the whole country shut down because we're not prosecuting?
No, it was
criminals are running free.
Yeah, we all take the week off.
Everybody takes the week off, and you're like, hey.
No, of course not. It was just it's a smaller conference, and it's more skills and getting and helping messaging and connecting with the jurors and which is an important part of beyond knowing the law, being able to effectively communicate to jurors and the public and elected officials is always an important skill, and that you need to work on as a prosecutor or any other sort of elected official.
Yeah. So what was it, like a weekend long or what?
No. It's just 2 days. It's compact. It's tight, and it's top-notch training from some of the best in the business. It's really good.
Let's talk about some of the legislation you wanted to see get through this year, Matt Harvey, from the legislature, and whether or not you had some success on it.
I think absolutely success can be a word used for that. Negligent homicide, which is now going to be called vehicular manslaughter, which is more appropriate. It's the negligent homicide, again, was only able to be committed with the use of a vehicle. So this name is more appropriate and easier to understand.
Many other states call it vehicular homicide, correct?
Yeah, I can't. We might be the only state that called it something other than vehicular manslaughter. So now that we have that on the books, and we have what I think are more appropriate penalties, and they're elevated, and that was a lot of hard work. The guy sitting beside me worked hard on that. A lot of our Joe Funkhauser worked a lot on that. We spent a lot of time on the phone, and I was down in Charleston and didn't speak at the committee meeting. Didn't need to.
No, you didn't. You were there, but you certainly didn't need to. I think the whole committee was behind it.
Absolutely, yeah.
Right from the beginning.
And a lot of other prosecutors were there. And this is the fourth year I've been working on this, and this is the first time that we started on the House side, and I believe that was the secret sauce, so to speak, in getting it passed this year. And just point out, it was unanimous.
And I'll give you this too. Joe Funkhauser worked. Him and I had almost the exact same bills because you had emailed us both the same thing, so we both put in the exact same bills. So both Joe and I went to JB Akers, the chair, and we really pushed us, and JB was all about it. And I think Joe really worked that. And it's not easy to pass a bill in Charleston. Even the easiest, simplest thing is not easy to get through all the other side. So you have to actually work your bills. And you had Joe on your side, and he worked really hard for you.
Absolutely, and I'm very thankful for his efforts and everyone else's, of course. And we had a lot of support on the Senate side from previous years, and they were there as well on this bill. And because it's had such a unfortunate effect and impact in the citizens of Jefferson County, Berkeley County, and many other counties across the state. I mean, it's not just isolated Jefferson County. Berkeley County has some pretty heartful situations as well, where you have a tragedy,
sure,
and then you have the second tragedy of being let down by the court. It's normal. There's nothing that can ever replace a human life in the court system, and so there's going to be that letdown, and that you can't replace someone. That's not what this is about. This is about when your loved one's life is reduced to a value of maximum of 6 months in jail because someone was acting so irresponsible that it was foreseeable that something like this could happen. and it's just gut wrenching, and it's a misdemeanor. And now, I forgot to add this. This is super important: is unborn children are protected now from this type of incident, whereas before they weren't.
So pregnant mom.
Yeah, absolutely.
And
absolutely.
now the baby.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So now 2 counts as opposed to
2 counts.
2 counts, yes. Or so, 1 count where someone's drag racing and hits a pregnant mother, and maybe the mother survives and the pregnancy terminates. Then we have something that we can act on besides reckless with injury.
What are the new penalties?
What are they, Mike?
Oh, geez. I'd have to go back and look to give you the specifics. The one neat thing about
like at least 2.
Yeah, I mean it was
2 years?
It was felony and
2 to 10. I mean,
there was some
it changed
discretion.
a little bit. Yeah,
there was a range, and we kind of lined it up with the other parts of code. So, but I can go back and find out.
Now, the first year that I attempted this, I got to say this bill's much improved over that, and it's the sense that I got for resistance to this bill wasn't because of the subject matter. It was the adequate protections against people who have a traffic accident with a tragic result. That's not the intent of this bill, to criminalize those types of acts. And so I'm sufficiently satisfied that there's enough guardrails that I thought they were already in place with our case law, Supreme Court case law, but I think this lays
it out that there has to be absolute negligence.
Yeah.
To go there.
Yeah.
Right. So if I'm driving and it's icy and it snows and I'm driving at the speed limit or under and I slide off the road and hit somebody and they lose their life.
Yeah, that
does not apply.
That does not apply to this. But if I'm drag racing, as you said, or I pass a school bus when I'm not supposed to, and my actions cause someone to lose their life or seriously harmed and injured for the rest of their life, this is where this would kick in.
Yeah, I think absolutely. Absolutely.
And is it one blanket rule for negligent vehicular homicide, Matt, or are there degrees that give you leeway in terms of how far you want to press the charges in a situation like this, or the penalties? In other words, are there degrees of this once negligence is established?
I think there is. There's still kind of a lesser, and I'd have to look at the bill exactly.
There's some discretion for the prosecutor to go after the different levels, as well as the judge for when sentencing. There's levels of sentencing that can be applied to this too.
Yeah. I'd have to pull the bill. I'm sorry, I didn't know we were going to talk about that today.
It's okay. How many years have you been trying to get something like this done? I know we've talked about it on the show for a couple years.
At least 4, and that means going to Charleston and testifying in front of the Senate Judiciary or the House Judiciary and work in the hallways, which is where most things get accomplished in Charleston, and just staying in communication with local delegates. And again, there's nobody that says I'm against this.
Sure.
It's just how to weave it through there.
Right.
So everybody's satisfied that the protections are in there.
You touched on this a little earlier, Mike, but what was the process like trying to get this to become law this year?
Well, I think Joe and I had the exact same bill. It dropped on day 1 or day 2.
And Joe's an attorney.
Joe Funkhouse is an attorney.
He'll be on next Tuesday, by the way.
Him and I had put in the exact same bills because Matt had sent us a list of ideas that he'd been trying to do for 4 years, including the DUI fleeing bill, a couple other ones. So Joe and I, we sit right next to each other on the floor. We talked. I said, listen, Joe, you run with this. You're an attorney. I'll co-sign it. I'll co-sponsor it, and I'll make sure we get it on an agenda, and we get it on an agenda early. That way it gets through the process, because once you get past crossover day and things like that. So we passed this really, really early in the session. We actually passed a lot of Matt's bills really early in the session because they were good ideas, and we just worked them. And then once they went over the Senate, we continued to work them, and we didn't have an issue. They basically sailed through, I think, pretty easily. We didn't have any issues with people holding them up or things like that.
Was this one bill, or were there others as well?
No, there were multiple bills. Each one was separate. So, and some of his were combined with some other ideas that people had. So,
one of them was just a complete loophole, closing of a loophole. in a criminal offense that's just been there as long as I've been practicing law.
Yeah.
And so, that there's nothing, it's clear the intent of the law was to not have that loophole. And so just closing it, I've tried that for years as well. And mention it to, officials. But what you have to do is you have to start early. You have to start before the session, and you got to get that language drafted. Suggesting language, draft language is helpful. Working with the legal staff at the Capitol is crucial, and being available to take their calls, which they called me several times. And
making sure there's no unintended consequences, because when you put something on a law, it's
Sure.
very, very broad. So we didn't get one of his to the finish line, which was the residency when taken into account when you're setting bail. That didn't get to the finish line. We just didn't get there on the last few days.
What was that story? I don't understand.
When a judge or a magistrate was setting bail, they should consider residency, whether it be local, state, or U.S. citizenship when setting bail. So when setting bail, let's say somebody's here from California, you're setting bail, you should take into account that we're going to have to go get them from California if we don't. So it was just, Matt was saying, it was just something that putting it in so that a judge could actually use that as a reason.
I think they could now. It's just clarifying that they could use nationality, their citizen status, as a permissible factor, which I clearly think they can now.
You mentioned a moment ago fleeing on a DUI. Was there
that was the
proposal of the law?
That was
the
the
technical.
Yeah.
So DUI and DUI second and third offenses are under Chapter 17, and it says for any second or subsequent offense under this chapter is X, an elevated penalty, and then you get to a third or subsequent under this chapter 17, it's a felony, and then the penalty. So, but fleeing while DUI is under Chapter 61, Chapter 61.517, and so it excluded that as being used as a predicate offense for a second or third or subsequent. So, and that's clearly not the case. You had to be under the influence and running from a police officer.
It actually almost incentivized you to run from the police officer.
Well, the administrative penalties were less.
Yes.
And so it happened to me probably back in 2005, 2006, 2007, somewhere in that, when I was a baby prosecutor in Berkeley County. There was someone who had been convicted of fleeing DUI, convicted of fleeing, and then after that convicted of another offense of fleeing DUI, and then the third time did the right thing and didn't run. As far as this conduct goes, it did improve, but he got a third. So the officer charged him with third offense DUI, and it's like, this is a first. It was like, what? Like, yeah, I mean, I can't get there. The officer was upset. I was, I'm like, there's nothing. This is not a prosecutorial discretion issue. I can't do it because the law doesn't allow me to.
That was odd.
That's very odd, and it was clearly unintended. And so what I learned about that in the process is I was like, what's so hard about this? Let's just add a comma and a reference and another comma. No. It ended up being 34 pages because all these cross references.
Two sections of code, so you got to cross reference it.
And then the administrative penalties under the DMV, that had to also be added to.
I really enjoyed the Judiciary Committee not being a lawyer, because I was always the one asking the normal questions. Like, can you explain this like a second grade level so that people understand it? And the lawyers in the room and the other legislators that were lawyers and the staff really enjoyed that, because it made it that we tended to make the bills more simple.
You mean the language of writing them?
The language, yeah.
There is really something to be said for someone that doesn't have legal training to look at a legal issue, because they don't have these restrictions in their mind that you can do this, do that. They're just looking at it totally open, and sometimes they're able to see a lot of other angles that lawyers get bogged down and cannot see.
Well, let me ask you this. Certainly that wasn't the first person who had a third DUI defense, and they fled on the first two. So why would it take so long for something like this to come along to be common sense changed? Any idea?
You'll have to ask previous legislators, but I know the ones that we have right now took this and ran with it, and we got it to the end.
Yeah, so...
well, the legislators wouldn't even know about this, I'm guessing, because it's not in their practical every day, but the prosecutors would.
Yes, and I would mention it, but you can't just mention it to a senator or delegate that are getting a million different things pitched at them every day. You have to. It took me a while to learn how to take that extra step to reduce it to writing. This was the first year that I actually put out like a little memo, and I sent it to my delegates and senators in Jefferson County, and then I showed it to Prosecutor Kinzer over in Berkeley County, and I said, I didn't want to offend him, and I said, what do you think of these ideas? He's like, yeah, I agree with you. I was like, you want to send these out as well? Or he's like, no, go ahead and just send them.
I think that made the real difference, Rob, is when you have it in writing and we do have these legislative wrap-ups, but that came early. It was in writing, explained exactly what he was trying to do. And when you're presenting a bill to a bill writer, which is a lawyer down in the Capitol, they can see the exact intent. And because it had been written by Matt already, it was much easier to write, much easier to understand, and much easier to run with right off the bat.
And because there was some explanation for the reasons for the change instead of, and I think that was a key in this one. And then when Will Valentino would have a question, or DJ would have a question, those are
the lawyers within the judiciary,
and they're great, and they could just say, "Call Matt." Yeah. He'll explain it.
Well, that's good. But and
they would.
I assume you said the officer was not aware of that law either, and I assume that the sheriffs and the sheriffs associations around the state weren't aware of that either?
I know you're not the spokesperson for them. I don't know what they were. Yeah, I really don't know. It would be an easy one to overlook, quite frankly, and maybe there's somebody that's been charged with a second offense and the predicate was a fleeing DUI, and it just. But if you read it carefully, and I'm always one that even to this day, I've been doing this 20 years. Like first thing I do when I'm diving into a case, I just go back and read the statute, even though I may have read it 1,000 times to get ready.
Well, this was a common sense one, and like you said early in this conversation on this one, Mike, the laws it stood to actually incentivize you to flee as opposed to
except the penalty was a lot worse if for fleeing DUI. It was a felony. I mean, it was I wouldn't quite say it was an incentive. It was just a loophole on the first.
It was the multiple, right?
And Rob, just to think about like this, if you get convicted of a fleeing DUI and you go to the penitentiary for your time, look backs on DUI seconds and third and subsequents is 10 years. So that
there were strict penalties in place then.
Yeah, right. So the chance of someone getting a second, third, or subsequent DUI with having two prior fleeing DUIs that might be the only time it's ever happened in West Virginia because of you have to serve your sentence. And then you have to be on parole, and then that takes time.
Mm-hmm.
And then but it happens.
Was that only one time that happened in your career that this came up?
Yeah, that's the only time I've seen it now. But a fleeing DUI, and then a second is more obviously a lot more common, and then that would have to be treated as first. But with the fleeing DUI, they didn't have to do the DUI classes, the safety and treatment classes that participate in the interlock. And all those other things that we have, the DMVs to get dangerous drivers off the road. Mm-hmm. So they have these penalties for if you're DUI. All of a sudden, if you're fleeing, you're not subject to taking the remedial and therapeutic classes and then having that extra step of having an interlock installed on your vehicle. So that is probably the more important part of that bill that we'll never hear about, but could save lives.
Okay. Well, that's good. We got that across the finish line. That's a plus. Was there any other legislation that you were hoping to get across that got or did not?
Well, I think this is one that was probably blended in with other bills. I think the penalties for murder are way too I'm sorry, I lost my headphones. Are way too low in West Virginia.
Yeah, I think we definitely blended that with another bill, and increased the penalties for murder.
What was the penalty
And
already?
you can't ask me that kind of thing. I'm not a
I can-
lawyer.
That's the prosecutor.
Okay. and this is not dependent on jurisdiction, Rob, so I can answer this question. It's 15 to life for murder in the first degree. So what that means?
15 seems kind of light.
It does. I agree with that wholeheartedly. So 15 to life. Now the jury would determine whether that's with or without mercy. So if without mercy, obviously it's a life sentence. No chance of parole. But with mercy, it's looking at parole in 15. Second degree murder is 40 years max, which, good time. It's 20 years.
And first is premeditated. Second is
like you're something less than premeditation. Like
we get into a fight.
Heat of the moment. Yeah.
It's kind of like an involuntary manslaughter, or that's more vehicular.
Well,
if we get into a bar fight and I punch you in the right spot and you die, that's not first degree murder.
Happened. That's absolutely not first degree murder. That might be.
But if I stab you with a knife
Yeah,
in
that's
a
different.
fight, that is different than me punching
Sure,
you.
that's a deadly weapon.
Yeah. It's really fact driven and hard to explain, and it's really a challenge in front of the juries to explain the difference between premeditation and malice
But
and
if
forethought.
does the laws that you got change? Does it affect if I get into a bar fight, punch somebody, and they die from the punch? Has that been changed? And what are the penalties for that as compared to first degree murder?
I don't know what they changed them to.
All right. And we don't know they changed them to for first degree murder either.
I
think it was
25.
I think 20 there were different levels. So
There was a couple bills running, so I got confused on what passed.
and we did combine a couple of those bills. So it was, I believe, it was 20 to, and it was, you say with mercy. I consider that parole. So they upped that level. I think it was every level got upped by about 5 years to 10 years. And
they got stepped up.
Again,
So
it's a very long bill, so you've got all these different levels that you guys have. So I can't recite exactly each one.
And in your defense, I didn't tell you what we'd be talking about in this first segment either. It was just kind
I
of
had no
off the cuff
idea.
stuff. Yeah, so I appreciate the information, though, and I'm glad you got a few things passed, Matt.
I'm very happy, and the citizens of West Virginia should be proud of their legislature this year.
All right. More legislative talk with Senator Jason Barrett, who will be with us via telephone after the break here. This